Great, thank you very much indeed for that. I think without me blathering on any more, I'll say open this up to questions because we haven't got too much time. Gentleman at the back there.
At the moment, you mainly seem to open access things after the copyright's been done in where they've been published in the journal. If you're doing sub-archiving, how can you ensure that it's properly peer-reviewed if you don't want to actually take it to a journal and just want to have it open access straight away?
Well, most of the open access repositories do include peer-reviewed material, and you can indicate there if it's been peer-reviewed, if it's in the process of being peer-reviewed, or but lots of them do take material that isn't peer-reviewed and that will never be peer-reviewed, and as long as it's indicated that that is the case, you can do that. Some, more of them, are trying to establish the system of peer review, which is important if we're going to use green open access using repositories to replace the certain version of gold open access that's currently being promoted by things like the Finch report. But you can still publish open access and make work available online in repositories. If that's what you want to do, you can do it in a variety of different ways.
Isn't the whole point that you essentially need to have a mediator between the author and the peer reviewer for it to really count as peer review, in the shape of an editor of some sort?
It does. The question is who should be that editor, and what seems to be when people have problems in their department about this, we're going to put this online and this isn't going to be authoritative anymore. People seem to forget that we are the people who act as those editors, we're the people who act as those peer reviewers, so we can actually do this ourselves. It makes, sometimes it requires a little bit of organisation and working together, but it's not, it's not very hard to establish an editorial board from people all over the world, since we all communicate online these days, so you can do that really easily and quickly. It's not very difficult to establish a peer review process. I know people are going to be talking about open journal systems later. That manages your whole peer review process for you. So it will track from the moment an article is submitted to where it is in that editorial peer review process. So this is all perfectly possible. Why people are talking about this and why they feel it's important is because publishers are asking for a lot of money to act as a gatekeeping body, and they perform valuable services. No one's saying that they don't. The question is, it's becoming a blocking mechanism, the amount of money that they're charging, rather than enabling messaging. And we have to think how much we want to carry on paying that cost, or having that cost put on our work and restricting its access and readership, or how much we want to devise other means of performing the editorial and peer review work, which is all perfectly possible easily, cheaply, quickly, with open access and the tools that are out there.
Hey.
I speak here as a historian, and I'm one of the things historian publishing, but I'm also speaking as someone who recently, it was the second talk on open access humanities publishing I've heard vaguely recently. I presume you know William Sinclair of Cambridge and his slightly different open access book publishing scheme. And I'm struck listening to you how much emphasis you got on repackaging and recreating text rather than on using the traditional format of the humanities monograph. Sure. And I find what you're saying highly inspiring in terms of, say, creating teaching resources or helping me get that course reader sorted. Where I don't see it helping is, right now we work in an academic culture which still values that monograph. Sure. And therefore, until we change that or should we change, if we do change that culture, we've still got to deal with the fact that people want us to publish monographs. And I think what struck me about yours and William's talk is that you can clearly do you can do open access peer review even for books. You've got print on demand, you can set up editorial boards, just like you were saying. Where you've still got the problem is convincing other people to take this seriously for promotion purposes, job purposes. And I think the academic presses still have an edge in in terms of marketing and distribution. I'm not sure it's worth quite the cost they put on it, but they do still have an edge there in terms of their experience.
Okay. Yeah, I know Open Book Publishers. It's come out of Cambridge, run by Rupert Catty. So yes, and we kind of correspond, and they've. One of the interesting things about open access presses is we're, as digital culture is, and a lot of times we're non-rivalrous. So we're not like commercial presses where we all have to compete for profits and we have to kind of enclose our texts. What we can do is we can share text, because this is what we're about. So they've just recently asked, we've got this new publishing system, can we have your text to include in our publishing system? And of course they can. They didn't really need to ask because they're licensed under a certain CC license that would enable them to do that, but they're friends and it was nice that they can do that. So when you're talking about conventional presses having better distribution means, what I would say is by sharing this, and that was the second such press that asked if they could have our books in 2 weeks that we'd have. So what we've got is not just us as a press promoting our work, we've got a whole network of other presses that are quite happy and willing to promote our work, and not just to the target audiences where they think they can sell this work, which in the majority of academic presses would be the UK, US and Australia. They can be available worldwide to anyone that wants them. The other question that you're talking about is a question of strategy. So if we went back to the PowerPoint slide where you had most of our book series are just like that. They're just very conventional, as I say. Most of the books that we do and that we've already published are the same as Open Book Publishers and the same as Williams and Clare's. They're kind of just straight. They look like books, you can print them off, you have them as PDF, they look exactly the same, you wouldn't know the difference. And we did that precisely for the reasons that you're talking about. You need that strategy to try and win people over. However, we've been doing this for quite a long time. I've been doing it, I can't remember, I said about 16 years. And as you're doing it, you start thinking, well, what else can we do with this medium? So we wanted to have some space where we could explore that. Because if we're going to solve this problem of open access, there isn't going to be one answer, or we're not going to arrive at a solution by everyone just leaping on one answer. What we need, and Maria Bourne, who I quoted earlier, what she argues is we need a lot of different publishing experiments. And only that way we'll kind of find out which ones work and which ones don't work for us. So we wanted to have a little space. Now I've emphasised that today to you because I'm guessing those that have come here are already kind of self-selected, you're already a little bit interested in open access. So just to me bang on and yet again about open access, it's really, I'm trying to give some sort of radical salute there. That we should do this, I was trying to say, well look, we can push, we can think about other things. It makes us open up some other additional interesting questions. But you don't have to do that. I'm doing that because that's what I'm interested in. I was relating it, the first part of the talk is, I kind of think that we have to probably start thinking about that. As I said, I showed philosophical transactions. Most academic journals don't seem that much different. What do we think about that? Can we still act like we're still in the late 17th century? We don't in other parts of our life. How come we're still doing this? What does that mean? How appropriate is that? Or do we have to think, things are changing, we might have to think of changing the way we act as academics and philosophers?
Chris, one of the things I really like about what you're doing is that you are, there's obviously a change in media or a new media, and that at all other points in history has changed textual culture. So when script comes along, it changes oral culture. When print comes along, it changes scribal culture. So the books that you're putting together seem to be, to me, to be doing what the medium is for, rather than, you're right, what we normally have is print media simply transferred, and that's all that I was talking about too. So, but to pick up on a bit of Eileen's question, the problem that we have as academics is the ref, which still seems to be predicated, despite what it says, still predicated on print culture. So while I love what you're doing, what are your thoughts and responses to how do we work with ref, which seems to me not to have fully caught up? with this?
Well, REF is slowly getting there, and there's all the talk about the next REF after 2014 that will require open access. So it is kind of getting there. Also, you've got to remember that I work in a School of Art and Design. I didn't always work in a School of Art and Design, but I do now. And one of the nice things that I like about working in a School of Art and Design is when I come up with these crazy things, they go, oh, okay, that sounds kind of interesting.
Yeah.
All right. That's a bit like art, isn't it? And so, as far as what I'm doing, as far as this is great for the RAF. There are other factors that we talked about last night. Some of us were talking about. You publish open access, your work has more dissemination, certainly. We won't get into the debate between the difference between dissemination and impact, but certainly you get a wider readership from a wider range of people. That's always talking even about some of that class. At the moment, yes, the majority of REF panels would probably be looking for very conventional paper-centric texts. The REF talks about that online publications should have the same status, or there shouldn't be any discrimination. Most people, and I do a similar role as you're talking about with REF in my institution, most people are very cautious about that. Most people think, yeah, this is what they say on paper, but actually they won't. They will review the traditional journals. And that is a problem for open access. Peter Suber's got this mentioned at a conference once. You know, we can all start a journal. I can show you how to start a journal in an afternoon. That isn't really very hard. And it could be a brilliant journal. It could be fantastic quality. The problem is you can start a quality journal in an afternoon, but you're not going to get prestige in an afternoon. It's going to take a lot longer. But that's why we started something like Open Humanities Press, to try and build up that prestige, to have an international board that people really in our area couldn't really argue with. And it has worked. So when the Australian Research Council tried to rate their journals, the Australian journals that we had, admitted when they had a first run through and a first draft, they weren't rated very highly because they're electronic and they had that usual kind of prejudice. But then the editors wrote and said, but have you seen, we're part of OHP, have you seen who's on the editorial board, have you seen how all this works? Then they got an A rating. It does kind of work.
Very quick.
Yeah, my question wasn't just about the will REF regard it as prestigious or authoritative enough, but the really interesting bit about what you're doing. REF wants to know, you're a researcher, which bit of this is your idea, and you might have a co-author, and then 50% is your co-authors. But the really interesting thing about what you're doing, and you mentioned very briefly Creative Commons licenses, is you're kind of, you're working past that kind of print idea of intellectual copyright and authorship, and the most exciting things that you're doing, you won't know who wrote what, as different things get added in, and it becomes like a medieval commonplace book. How do we attribute that to anybody as a researcher? And yet it may be a great piece of collaborative research made out of almost anonymous contributions. Yes.
Would I submit those pieces to the REF? I don't know. I'm kind of sometimes thinking there is a piece I've mentioned it briefly. This piece I published on piracy, and what I did with that is I wrote about piracy, but then I published it on a peer-to-peer pirate network. And then as soon as someone downloaded it and seeded it on these networks, I destroyed my original copy. So it's only out there as a pirate.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of thinking maybe I can submit that to the REF, and they have to go and steal this text to actually review it. And I could call it art because I work in an art school. I don't know. But against the question of strategy, how far you want to push it institutionally, not all of these things I would for the REF, because we're all playing strategic.
Yeah.
I think we'll draw this to a close now, but if I could just go back to one thing that you said a few minutes ago, that are we doing anything different in some respects from the mid-17th century, the foundation of the Royal Society and its transactions? In one sense, things are still absolutely the same. What really counts, if you're going to get your ideas accepted, is if there's credibility there in terms of peer review. I mean, that's the one thing that was very, very central around that time, and it's going to be really hard to break out of that, I think. But, Gary, thank you very much indeed for all your thoughts.